You know, obviously Renee and this extraordinary performance at the centre of it.
And it's a brilliant cast, as you've already mentioned. You've got the originals like Hugh Grant in there and Renee.
One of the first scenes that I did was on the heath, and so it was when Bridget gets stuck in the tree. You know, I think self-belief comes so naturally when you're young. You know, this idea that I can do it, and that, you know, you mentioned before about sort of manifesting things. You know, singing in the mirror with the hairbrush is all about that, and it's, if you don't have that initial spark, it's like the old adage, it just can't happen. It can't happen without real passion behind it.
Obviously going through something like that, losing your dad, and it was in a shocking situation in a car crash.
You always want to have a kind of vulnerability, I think. You know, you don't want to harden up, and that's one of the things that, you know, I've always been trying to be careful of, that, you know, if you have that ability, you can tap into that area of yourself and your psychology that is like, I can struggle through this, I can deal with this, you know.
Hello, Chiwetel.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm really good.
Excellent.
I'm really good. Obviously, you're in the thick of press for Bridget Jones, so I'm imagining you're being sort of pushed from pillar to post.
That's right.
It's all quite hectic.
Yeah, in a good way.
And just a lot of talking about yourself and the film. Do you need to go and sit in a quiet room tonight and just
the lights low,
speak?
Meditate? Yeah, that'd be good.
It's probably needed. I mean, there is so much excitement about this film. I got to see it yesterday and I absolutely loved it. I mean, I was that peak age of maybe 16 when the book came out. So it was, I read it straight away, loved the films. Have you got a long history with loving Bridget Jones, being involved in Bridget's world?
Yeah, maybe from the films mostly. And so, but yeah, I got on the train immediately as soon as the first one came out. And, you know, it was iconic, and it, you know, sort of changed everything, you know, overnight in a weird way. You know, there was just this arrival of this extraordinary character that, and actually an extraordinary set of characters, I think, that you sort of were able to find yourself in a little bit, you know, in one of them or a sequence of them. And then I think it was, you know, obviously Renee and this extraordinary performance at the center of it that was clearly remarkable and clearly going to take everybody on a journey. And then I thought the way that it was kind of put together, you know, the way that London looked, the way that...
London in this one looks divine.
It's extraordinary, right?
Oh, the heath and the snow.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I think that sits in the tradition of the films and of all of them. There's always, they always found some way of representing the city and the sort of community. And friendships, you know, I just feel like there was so much that was available to kind of relate to.
Yeah.
In the films. So.
It's a good advert if you're like living in another country, maybe America, and you've never been to the UK. You'd be like, I'm literally booking now. Yes. I'm going. I want to find that little pub and watch the snowfall with the lanterns outside. Dreamy, dreamy. And it's a brilliant cast, as you've already mentioned. You've got the originals like Hugh Grant in there and Renee, but also some new young talent like Leo Woodall. Yeah. Did you get to hang out much off set? Did you spend time together when you weren't filming? Yeah,
I mean, a little bit, because we kind of, you know, we would see each other a little bit, you know, during the day, you know, because we would sometimes be at the same location or something, but not doing a lot of the same scenes. One of the first scenes that I did was on the heath, and so it was when Bridget gets stuck in the tree, and so it was great because we got a chance to sort of meet a few of the people, including Leo and you know, and the kids as well, and it was great fun, a great way to start this journey. But there wasn't that much opportunity to sort of meet everybody through that, you know, but to spend time with Leo, for example, through that. But we're doing it now. We're definitely doing it now.
Well, I heard you on the radio this morning with Chris Evans, with Leo, having an absolute riot. I mean, when you walk into Chris's studio, it's it's mayhem.
It's true. It's at 11, so that's
it is. He brings the energy, and you just have to match it. And it's what you very much did. It was a really enjoyable interview. You play Mr. Wallaker, a science teacher. He is a very measured man. He's all about facts and science, which is a lovely combination compared to Bridget, who in this film particularly is even more chaotic than normal. I mean, there were a few scenes with her kids where I was like, this is quite close to home, actually. This is very me at the moment. Would you say you're like Mr. Wallaker? Do you like facts? You like straight lines, science? This is how we're doing things?
I would say I guess I would err more to that side than the Bridget side. I guess more to that side than the slightly more chaotic side. But not as much as Mr. Wallaker. He is very he's very serious. He's very sort of straight up and down, like 6 o'clock.
Yep.
And that's fun to play, especially as he starts to find maybe these sort of other parts of himself as well, and these just sort of other things are kind of introduced into his worldview, and also he feels this kind of sense of responsibility, maybe is the wrong word, but there's something that he feels a connection with also with Billy, and these ideas of what this family is going through, and they're going through quite a lot of things, and maybe it's masked by some of the kind of chaotic energy of Bridget and so on, but Billy, especially in the midst of all that, is somebody that Mr. Wallaker recognizes as one of his students, who maybe does need a little bit of help, or just a little bit of a kind of extra conversation, because obviously he's dealing with a lot of things for a young guy. So,
yeah.
So that really represented to me something very interesting about Wallaker, that through the sort of science and level-headedness, there's also something that's very empathetic.
Yeah, there's a real softness. I mean, one of my favourite scenes was where you were on the school trip and you were sat with Billy, which is Bridget's son in the film, and he's lost his dad, and you had this really beautiful moment guiding him through it and helping him through that situation. And I, knowing your own personal backstory, was really taken aback by that moment, because that's something that you obviously intimately know all about,
Sure.
having lost your dad as a kid yourself. And I wonder, in a scene like that, how much do you need to or want to draw on your own personal experience to really convey that? And because I certainly felt like, God, this is extremely real, this moment. It's something you're feeling. I can see it in your eyes. But I don't know how much you find that a necessity to do a scene like that.
Well, it's complicated, I think. And it is a question I think you always wonder, as an actor, how much of the kind of, I suppose, the personal math you're going to do in a scene. And how appropriate that is, because sometimes going to a certain place might not really work if you end up sort of not really being able to continue the scene very easily, because you're connecting with something very raw and emotional for you. And but obviously you consider those things. You have to pull in a little bit of your own experience into those moments. But I tend to try to limit that, to be honest, to try to kind of sort of contextualize it. I like to sit within a character, within a character's experience. And it's useful, I think, if I have things that I can draw on or reflect on or think about when playing a scene. But I don't want to do that I don't want to lean into that too heavily, because in a way it isn't about my experience. It's about, in this instance, it's about Billy's experience, and also about Mr. Wallaker's experience, which is very different to my experience. And so trying to maintain an honesty around that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I guess I've never taken too much time to think about that with actors, how much of their own personal emotion is in that moment. Is it just that's why they're bloody good at their job, because they can bring that out of literally thin air? Or is it something that you're really deeply needing to process and go through? But equally, I'm imagining you don't want to traumatize yourself or take yourself to a place where you then go home feeling all of that.
I think it depends, I think it depends. If I had written, if the character of Mr. Wallaker was written as having had that experience, say had an experience similar to my experience as a person, then was talking to Billy in this way, so that it would make sense to bring in a lot more of the energies that I have into that moment. Now, I could invent that Mr. Wallaker had that, but he doesn't seem to have had that experience in that way. So he's sort of coming at it with Billy from a point of view of empathy, but not necessarily that he's had a parallel experience himself. Otherwise, I think he would say that, and he doesn't. So I think you have to kind of judge when to do that and when not to, and how much of that kind of energy to release, and how appropriate it is, or in the sense of how much it makes sense to do that, because I've certainly had to do and been in situations playing characters that have paralleled much more directly experiences that I've had, and then and in that sort of instance, you do tend to then, let that into allow that to arrive in the moment in a sometimes a pretty emotional way.
Yeah.
Because you have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful thing to watch, and I think as a viewer, you can see those moments where it is so felt and real, and we've seen you do that on stage and in different cinematic experiences throughout time. I loved your interview that you did with Kirsty Young, where you talked about this subject in much more depth, about your dad dying when you were 11 and it having such a profound effect on your life and your outlook on the world. Do you think, obviously going through something like that, losing your dad, and it was in a shocking situation in a car crash that you were also involved in, you learn from a very young age that life can be brutal. But then I guess also in your long career that you've had, and a very successful one, you also have experienced a hell of a lot of abundance in many ways, and seeing that you can, manifest things and you can achieve goals. Would you say you're more of a pessimist or an optimist, and what would you say has informed how you see the world?
Oh, no, I definitely think I'm an optimist overall, 100%. I don't think I have a kind of a pessimistic outlook, really. I think that, I say that. I have not with sort of personal matters, not in the terms of, I have a lot of faith in people, I don't necessarily have that much faith in the world, in the way that the world is kind of organized and run, and the way
now
specific
more
things
than ever.
Exactly could be said, the way things are kind of handled, and the way that the system sort of works and doesn't work, but I have a lot of faith in people, and so the optimism that I have sort of comes from that, that I think that there is so much inherent kind of goodness and capacity, and people really striving to do things and make positive impacts. And I've seen, I've been lucky enough to be in so many different places, so many different countries, to work with so many different people from so many different backgrounds and circumstances, from very kind of affluent, sort of America and all of that, to people who are really living in this completely different way and struggling with certain things that are, very, that are sort of about basic needs, really. And when I was making my film, when I directed the film in Malawi, the people there, the Malawian people there, were so extraordinary as people and extraordinarily supportive of me and the process of what we were doing and what we were trying to do in that film. And, I think you have all of these moments of reacting and interacting with people. You recognize how special people are, how their perseverance, their capacity for joy in so many different kinds of circumstances, just the richness of soul. Malawi is often talked about as the kind of warm heart of Africa. And you really, as soon as you land there, you really recognize and feel that in the people that you meet. And it really tells you something about humanity. And so I feel like if you have experiences like that, this is a sort of long way of answering your question, but if you have experiences like that, it's very hard to come away from those experiences and feel pessimistic about people.
Yeah.
People are wonderful. People can be absolutely extraordinary. People are so amazing. So I am definitely optimistic.
That's a very beautiful answer. Would you say that going through something at such a young age like that has made you particularly resilient? And have you noticed that in yourself?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope that there's a resilience there. I hope that it doesn't turn into that. It doesn't. That you always want to have a kind of vulnerability. I think and sometimes resilience, or if you go through hard things and sort of certain struggles, sometimes it can. You don't want to harden up, and that's one of the things that I've often tried to be careful of. That if you have that ability, you can tap into that area of yourself and your psychology that is like, I can struggle through this, I can deal with this, but it can, and you might know that you have that capacity, but I think you also have to balance that sometimes with being vulnerable, because some of it is a cover for not wanting to feel pain again, not wanting to feel kind of sorrow and sorrowful things, and not letting that sort of thing in. Because how hard it is, but so some things have to be kind of slightly unlearnt, in order to be vulnerable. And as an actor, I think specifically, vulnerability and openness is really an important part of the job. So sometimes I have to kind of unlearn, or sometimes sort of try and forget the things.
Yeah, well, it's habit, isn't it? If you're used to, from a young age, having to push through certain feelings or situations and dealing with, essentially I'd use the word trauma. I don't know if that feels appropriate to you because it's your story, but when you've got to deal with something like that, then it's a habit that you are used to dealing with a certain amount of pain or loss, whatever it might be.
Sure.
And I'm sure that's quite tricky to unpick at times.
Yeah, I think trauma is a good word. Certainly traumatic. I suppose like any of those sort of words, they sort of now, or in recent times, it feels like they cover a lot of ground.
They're slightly overused. Word trauma can be used for many things.
Yeah, words like trauma.
I think yours is in the truest sense.
Yeah, I've sort of certainly done a lot of heavy lifting recently.
Yeah.
But I think that, but yes, it's a traumatic experience and what that sort of means and how you reflect on it, and wanting to keep yourself vulnerable and open, and not letting, I guess it boils down to just not wanting to have traumatic experiences totally define you as a person. That you can sort of move beyond that. It's, in a sense, the kinds of things that I'm talking about in this context are things that you can, in the end, you can rationalize, and it's nothing that can be fixed, and it is part of life. There are different levels of traumatic experiences. Obviously, it's not an experience that anybody is responsible for example, or that anybody can be blamed for, and that's different as well. That these are things that just happen, and one has to accept within that context. There are different, obviously, there are various different things that happen to people, and in a way, because it is things, for me, that are things that sort of just happen, I suppose you can kind of rationalize it and land on
acceptance, I guess. Is that what the aim
exactly
is?
I think that's what I'm sort of talking about. Acceptance is a weird word, though, isn't it? I never know quite what acceptance feels like.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously you can live on and have and maybe that is a form of acceptance. But I think that I don't know if it's a word that really describes what it is trying to describe. I don't think you ever completely have acceptance. It's like you just understand and rationalize, where you are and what it means and how it's changed your life, and that can be, and you can find areas. Obviously, there are the negative areas, but you can find how it's changed your life in ways that have made you richer, and certainly have made you more capable of helping somebody else, which is always the best kind of way of coming through any sort of traumatic experience. It's like, how has that helped me with this other person's issues and stuff?
Did it have the sort of, I guess, in my head, obvious outcome of you going, life is short, I'm not going to fuck about here, there's things that I want to do, and I'm not going to waste time deliberating it, I'm quite urgent about things. Do you think it had that effect on you?
For sure. Naturally. It wasn't even a thought, It wasn't a conscious thing. It was just that was suddenly in my behavior, And it wasn't even something that I even noticed until somebody else pointed it out, really, you know. And I think it's when you have people around you, it wasn't even close friends that I had. It was when I was starting to work and travel, and then you sort of meet people who are kind of new to you. And so you're kind of presenting your energy, and maybe you get on, and so you're spending time together. And at a certain point, they're like, what's going on, you know? Like,
who is this guy?
Yeah, what's happening? You know what I mean? Like, why are you involved in like 300 different things at the same time? What's going on? And you're like, oh, right, maybe I have this kind of personality trait at this point because I have a kind of reaction to life, which is that you've got to do everything, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and to be a successful actor, the level that you're at, top of your game, that is like 1 in a billion. It's so hard to get to where you're at. You know, so many people want to be in brilliant films and want to be acting in jobs that they've got the pick of, where you can read scripts and go, nah, I'm not doing that. So you have to have an element of urgency. I'm imagining obsession.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true?
I think so. At a certain point, you know, I think it's, you know, I can reflect on it now, I suppose, because I don't feel like I sit within that quite as much anymore. But certainly as I was beginning, you know, I think it is just a complete obsession. And you know, and I think, you know, you're living out of a suitcase, you are traveling at the drop of a hat, you are going, you know, you're just always on the move, and it is always your number one priority, you know, is the work, and that's your life, you know, and it's a total experience, you know. It's who you know, it's who you meet, it's where you work, it's how you think, it's all of the things that define you for that period of time. And it's a blur, you know. I think for me, you know, like 20s and early 30s, it's a sort of a bit of a blur because of just the amount of movement, the amount of travel, the amount of work, and exciting, you know, as well, and work that you're passionate about, work that you love, and you know, it's extraordinary. But it's total.
Yeah.
Know, and that's the thing.
I think it's such a incredibly competitive market, if I'm going to use that word, where you know you have to be all in, otherwise you know you're wasting your time, quite frankly. You've got to be all in, and also I guess have an element of self-belief. And again, I heard you talking to Kirsty about this in a roundabout way, that the benefit of being, say, 19, 20 is that self-belief, again, isn't even a thought. It's just, I'm going to do this job because I want to. And then maybe as we get older, I've certainly found this, that dissipates slightly and you're a bit more questioning yourself and maybe your ability or your choices. And having that slight naivety married with self-belief seems to be key, would you say?
I think so, yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I think that you need to... you know, I think self-belief comes so naturally when you're young. You know, this idea that I can do it. I can do
anything I want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it is that thing, and that, you know, you mentioned before about sort of manifesting things, and that's, you know, singing in the mirror with the hairbrush is all about that, and it's, you know, and it's sort of why young people do it, and why it kind of sometimes comes to pass that they do then get to live those dreams and push those things. But if you don't have that initial spark, and you don't have that initial sort of self-belief, then it you know, it's like the old adage, it just can't happen. It can't happen without real kind of real passion behind it, and it's not something that you can tell yourself to want. You know, I think it's just there, you know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with a career as long as yours, there are, of course, moments of self-doubt. And one that I was reading about very recently was, and I think it was the last time I actually saw you was on the red carpet of the BAFTAs, where you won a BAFTA for 12 Years a Slave, but you were in this huge furore about the film. You know, everyone was talking about it. You were nominated for an Academy Award. Steve McQueen had been extremely public in saying, you know, Chiwetel is the only man for the job. There was never going to be anyone else play this part. And you, as an actor, obviously wait for scripts like this to turn up. It's the pinnacle, you know, you want that to happen. And then you get the script and you're like, holy shit, am I capable of this? And that was a moment of self-doubt.
Totally, yeah.
I mean, how do you ride that out? Because you've got to do a film like that, you've got to be committed in every way to, I can play this part. I am telling someone's story. I've got to do it justice.
Yeah. I think it was, I think that first time that I read 12 Years a Slave, I was, I was in tears by the end of just reading it. I was just sort of very emotional by the story. And I just thought, this is such a huge responsibility. This is such a kind of leap, in terms of what I have to kind of represent and what I have to do and where I have to go. And I didn't know if it was that I was the person, that I could do it essentially. And I said that to Steve, and it was almost that was that, that it wasn't gonna happen.
Oh, it went that far?
Yeah. It was, there was a kind of, and then I spoke to some other people, agents, because you have to have these further conversations, right? And they were just like horrified. Just like, you've got to...
You're doing it.
Yeah, you've got to, if you need to give yourself a good talking to, then you're just going to have to give yourself a good talking to, because this is an extraordinary opportunity. And if you can't walk away from something because you love it so much, it's like, you have to sort of dive into that moment. You have to kind of lean into that moment. And I was, I was just very lucky that I was able to I had another read of the book and the script, and I think it was just through the process of going over everything, because I was pretty determined. It wasn't a whim, but it was in the process of going back over everything that something clicked for me, and I thought, I do actually have a way into this as myself, just as a way into this character, a way into Solomon's journey that I think is the right way into it. And I feel like that's the kind of feeling you have to have. You have to feel that the part is in you somehow, that it's just that it's really in you. And once I discovered that, I think then I was like, okay, I can try and do this.
Oh, well, you did more than try. It was just an unbelievable performance, just unbelievable. I mean, obviously, you've connected with a whole array of characters over the years. You've had such a diverse career on screen and in the theatre. And your first leading stage role was playing Othello. And we've had some other Shakespearean actors on here, and I'm always completely fascinated why you're drawn to Shakespeare, because it's complicated and there's no margin for error. Everybody knows it. You've got to nail the story. Everyone's got an opinion about how that character should be portrayed. We had David Tennant on recently. We've had Dame Harriet Walker on talking about this too. What was it at such a young age? Because you were 19 when you played Othello for the first time.
Yeah, for the first time at 19 for the National Youth Theatre.
But obviously your interest in Shakespeare started before that. Theatre really grabbed you. What was it about theatre, but more specifically Shakespeare, that really spoke to you?
Yeah, I think it was just that I understood, I heard it, and it's sort of hard to describe. And I've tried to describe it before, but it's always complicated. It was Henry IV Part 1, and a sort of wet Wednesday. You're half staring out the window, and we're doing Henry IV Part 1 at school, and something about Hal's speech, struck me. And it was sort of that there was something about what he was describing. It's a moment when Hal is talking about, his future and what he's going to be, and how he sort of feels that he's sort of wasting his life in this moment, but he has a plan for himself, or the world has a plan for him somehow, and he is going to at some point rise up to this moment. And I feel like I was 13, I'm in school, I'm kind of hearing these words, and they suddenly, and exactly as you say, they felt sort of Shakespearean and alien, but then suddenly they just sort of had a kind of clarity. And I was like, I feel like this. I feel like I'm inside the experience that Shakespeare is writing about as a 13-year-old boy who does not know what is going on, really, and just is having these experiences, doesn't know what it's supposed to add up to, where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be thinking, what I'm going to do, why I'm doing anything, and suddenly Hal is talking about this in a way, from 400 years ago or something, in a way that I understand. I went around school that week like I had discovered Shakespeare. I was like, You got to listen to this guy. He's really interesting.
There's this new guy on the
There's
street.
This new guy. He's called William. Just wait, William Shakespeare, something like that. He's brilliant, and people are like, yeah, he's sort of well known.
Yeah. We've heard of him. Yeah. But how funny. I mean, I think it's quite rare that happens. And even now, I saw Macbeth recently at the theatre, and I am concentrating, like my eyes are like this, I'm ears open, listening to every word. I'm trying to keep up with it. Am I clever enough? And I think at 13, that takes a special kind of brain to go, this really makes sense to me. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, I didn't know what that... It was funny because then I went down to the theatre to start... to audition, and I thought maybe it was just that piece of Henry IV, that had that impact on me, and so it didn't. I felt like, well, maybe that's not something that really, it's not a general thing or something, and maybe maybe it's just a transient interest. So I went down to the theatre anyway, and it was a beautiful theatre at my school, Dulwich College, and I'd never really been inside. And they were doing some auditions for Measure. And so I did the audition, and again, with one of Angelo's speeches, as I started to do it, I had the same sort of feeling. I just really connected to what he was saying and the experiences that he was going through and the way the language was being utilized. And it felt like I had access to this language, in a surprising way, in a way that seemed, easy. It seemed easy. It seemed like a way of speaking and expressing self that I got, like singing a familiar song or something, that was that just sort of happened, and it was in a sense it was sort of undeniable. That is, that other people there felt the same thing. They felt like, oh, you've really got an access to this that seems surprising, just that it seems that it sort of comes to you very easily. And it was just because I sort of understood emotionally somehow just what it was communicating. And I loved what it was communicating, and I loved how it was communicating it. And so I just really became, for that period, totally obsessed with Shakespeare. I was just, I felt like I had sort of this connection to this writer that obviously was very famous and everybody knows, and but it still felt like this sort of unique kind of so I just sort of started devouring all of Shakespeare's plays. I'd write quotes and Shakespearean quotes on my wall. I was 15 or whatever, and I'd be doing like my whole wall's covered in different quotes from different plays. And I'm sitting, my sister would say that I would be up there just sort of randomly doing different plays that I wouldn't be performing. I wouldn't be about to perform on stage, but I would just be going through all of the plays, and all of the different characters. And I just felt this really kind of, And so then I went to the National Youth Theatre and just carried on that particular journey, and then also started to expand it out into not just classical texts, but into all, different, all sorts of different pieces and different theatre. And I was just and even that still, just there was something in the language of when it really works that I just sort of felt like I'm really inside of this somehow. It feels like the only way that I could really understand how to just self-expression, which is a strange thing to say, but it was through other people's work in that way in theatre that I could actually talk about myself in any way, and find those ways of talking about my own feelings.
It's a magical connection, I think, to find that, and especially as a teenager when we're desperate to express ourselves and tell the world who we are, or try and figure it out ourselves. I'm definitely still trying to do that, but it's magical to have that clarity at that age. But then there's the performance side, especially when you're performing Shakespeare on stage. Were there nerves at that point, or do you get stage fright even today? And how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, I don't remember being that nervous then. I just remember being so excited, and being so excited about having an opportunity to translate this feeling that I was having and actually take it out onto a stage and to perform, and and when it would work, it was amazing, and there was, you could just the feeling of communication, with an audience, and and sort of telling a story, and there was just this real sense of feeling that I was in the right place, that this was something that I was doing something that I really felt like this is what I should be doing right now.
Yeah.
And in a time when, and at an age when you can be really unsure about what you're doing and why you're doing it, suddenly a lot of those questions were sort of answered in those moments when I was either rehearsing or performing. And nerves, and again, it's one of those things that nerves and sort of being worried about things, so all of that did arrive. It did happen, a bit later on. But in those very early sort of teenage years, it was all sort of excitement of performance.
It's so annoying that the older you get, the more you worry. I hate that one. I was the same. When I used to do live TV at 15, I just felt like nothing, zero, like just fun, excitement. Now,
yeah,
don't put me anywhere near a live TV camera. It's too risky. Or it's like theatre. You're so exposed if something goes wrong. There's no way of covering your tracks. People have seen you mess up, say the wrong thing, forget your line, whatever. It's such risky business. Would you say you are a worrier now?
Much more so, yeah. I mean, I am. It's something that as soon as it began to happen, with any frequency, sort of nerves and intensity of nerves, it's now something that I was able to kind of analyze, so that I could try and sort of get on top of a little bit, just to kind of break down like what's actually happening. Like, why do I feel this way? What is this anxiety really fueled by? Because I have as much passion and love for the thing. I'm not as worried about how people kind of receive certain things, especially if I feel within it that the work is strong. So what is it really that's creating some of the kind of neurosis around it, And then I suppose understanding a little bit of that, which is, as you get older, sometimes nothing to do with performance itself. It's really about all of the other aspects of your life and all of the other ways in which you feel that you either have or haven't let yourself or other people down, and how that's re-manifest. And it's always the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and that fear that, you're going to prove some aspect of your personality by failing at something that you knew was present in some other aspect of your personality that you want to sort of punish yourself for. And there's all of that comes with just getting older, I think, and just having, and not being, perfect, and having to figure out certain things, and, making mistakes or stepping on toes, or, just having all of those situations and circumstances that goes into being a person, and being an imperfect person. And so then you can bring a lot of that stuff into a sort of punitive sense of, your own neurosis. And of course, I think a lot of that is natural ultimately, and you can't kind of go back to the sort of pure essence of being a teenager. And,
Such a shame.
I mean, it is, but also
but with a wise head.
Exactly. You carry with you all of the other things of life, and all of the other incredible experiences, amazing experiences that you have. And so that's the sort of balance. But what I try and do now is separate all of those things. Is just try to understand what is interrupting something when it's happening. And if I can clear that out a little bit, then I do find that I can have a tiny bit of that sort of artistic clarity, which does ultimately produce the best work.
Without a doubt.
Yeah,
we've all got to learn our own bespoke way of just mitigating that voice that's in our head, that's creating the worries and the narratives and driving the anxiety. It's I think the better we get at that, the easier everything certainly becomes. I would love to end by asking you, Chiwetel, where is your happy place, either actually or figuratively?
Where is my happy place? I think, it's sort of, I guess it's a cliche naturally, but, to be around the people that you love, is very, very, very comforting. And, that sense of home, and I spent a lot of time in, traveling, just as I was saying, for the first kind of few, for a long time, a couple of decades of my working life, it was sort of a lot of movement, a lot of traveling. And I felt as I would, open another suitcase somewhere, or even if I was trying to spend a few months or 6 months or 8 months, 10 months, I would always feel a little bit like I was on a holiday from my life, that my real life was happening somewhere else. My real life was actually happening in London, and I was kind of having experiences that were just sort of not really part of my real life, that I was, and it always made me feel slightly just sort of dislocated and sort of uncomfortable in a way. And having done that for so long, now I feel like I'm in my life, which is a sort of strange thing to say, but it's a true feeling. I feel like I'm actually honestly experiencing my life in real time, and that makes me happy.
Well, that is a bloody lovely answer. And it's been so great to talk to you today. Good luck with all the other press that you've got to do, and no doubt travelling. Chiwetel, thank you so much.
Pleasure, thank you.